A Nordic and White Sea adventure. This is our 20-day cruise that takes Discovery all along the Norwegian coastline, right across the top Russia and into the White Sea, with the highlight being 2 days in the very remote Solovetsky Islands. So cruising from Harwich, the first port of call is Bergen, and Bergen's always the perfect port to have as an introduction to Norway. People love the city, which is very easily accessible from the port, and they can also go further afield if they wish, and to the home of Edward Grieg, where they have the chance to hear a recital of his works in the surroundings that actually inspired him. From Bergen we spend a day at sea before we reach Bodo, and this is a new port of call for Discovery. Anybody with an interest in World War II history will probably want to visit the Museum of Norwegian Aviation, which has two sections, one which is on military aviation but one which is also on commercial. Very fascinating museum. Another alternative from here is Salströmmen, which is one of the strongest maelstroms in the world. Our next port of call is our first Russian port of call, which is Murmansk. Murmansk is most famous as the termination point of the Arctic convoys, where the Allied convoys used to, during the Second World War, face U-boats and perilous seas to make a journey to bring supplies to the people of Russia. It's also the home of the nuclear-powered fleet of Arctic icebreakers, and Lenin, which was the world's first nuclear-powered icebreaker, is now tied up alongside, and if you wish you have the chance to go on there and actually see something of one of these very unique boats. Following that we have a day at sea, and this is where we cruise into the White Sea and we spend 2 days at anchor in the very remote Solovetsky Islands. The highlight of the Solovetsky Islands is the monastery, which is one of the most remote monasteries. It's now back working as a monastery, because at one point it was actually taken over by Stalin, and it was one of the Gulag camps from which people sent there didn't expect to return at any point. We then, having spent 2 days there, continue through to Archangel in Russia, our final Russian port of call, and having spent time there we return back up to Norway, to Kirkenes, which lies on the Russian-Norwegian border. A very fascinating town to visit, and some very beautiful countryside and scenery. From here we take round to Hammerfest. Hammerfest is a very tiny little town which at the end of World War II, when the Germans left, Hitler had the scorched earth policy when he wanted to raze towns to the ground, and he certainly succeeded with Hammerfest. There was only one building that actually remained standing. Having been rebuilt, there's a very fascinating museum that tells about life during occupation of the Second World War, what life was like afterwards, and how the city is now today. From Hammerfest we spend a day at sea before going to Trondheim, and the highlight of Trondheim is probably Nidaros Cathedral, but it's a very fascinating city to explore in itself. There's a lot of history there. We then continue down to Åster, which is a new port of call for Discovery. Åster nestles in amongst, at the end of the fjord, amongst the Sunnmøre Alps, which is a very beautiful area of Norway, and tours here will take you through those mountains, and also there's the Trollstigen, which is the very steep road, and then there's islands that are reached by the world's deepest subsea tunnels. And finally our port of call is Florø, another new port of call of Discovery, which is on the coast, and Florø has made its money through herring. It's actually a fishing town, and there's a coastal museum there. It's also gateway to some very beautiful scenery that we'll be taking you to before we take a day at sea to go back to Harwich.